There was a time when you could walk into your neighbor's kitchen without knocking, sit down at their table, and nobody thought it was strange. Doors stayed open. Keys stayed in the ignition. Children belonged to the whole street, not just one house. If you grew up that way, you already know what I'm talking about. This isn't a story about rules or laws. It's a story about how much we used to trust each other. And it started with the simplest thing of all, the front door that was never locked. The unlocked door. It started with the simplest thing of all, the front door that was never locked. Not because nobody thought about it, because nobody needed to. You could walk down to the corner and back, leave the house for an hour, and the door stayed exactly the way you left it, unlocked, sometimes wide open with just a screen door rattling in the breeze. Cars sat in driveways with the keys still in them, just in case someone needed to move it. Today, leaving a door unlocked for an afternoon would make most people nervous. Back then, a locked door practically meant you didn't trust the people around you. And in most neighborhoods, that would have hurt feelings more than it protected anything. Maybe a porch light got left on by accident overnight, and nobody worried about that either. Borrowing tools without asking. Then there were the tools. The lawnmower that lived in your garage but somehow spent half its life at the Henderson's place. The ladder that made its way around the block every summer without anyone writing a note about it. You'd glance out the window and see your hedge trimmer in someone else's yard, and you wouldn't even think to ask when it was coming back. It always came back. Today, that kind of casual borrowing might raise an eyebrow, maybe even a security camera alert. Back then, it wasn't carelessness, it was an unspoken agreement that what was yours was sort of everyone's, as long as you brought it back clean and full of gas. And if a neighbor needed it a little longer, they'd just mention it the next time they saw you outside. No big deal made of it either way. A cup of sugar through the back door. And it wasn't just tools. It was sugar, butter, eggs, whatever you ran out of in the middle of making dinner. You'd send a kid out the back door with a measuring cup and a simple instruction: go ask Mrs. So-and-so. Nobody called ahead. Nobody worried about bothering anyone. The back door was basically an extension of your own kitchen, and the whole street ran on the same understanding. You give what you can, and someday you'll need something too. Today, most of us wouldn't dream of knocking on a stranger's door for a cup of flour. Back then, it wasn't a favor. It was just how the neighborhood fed itself. And when your own kitchen ran short the next week, somebody's kid showed up at your back door with the exact same cup, like clockwork. Kids roaming from house to house. Kids moved through that whole stretch of houses like it was one big yard. You didn't ask permission to go to the next house over, or the one after that. You just went. Screen doors slammed all day long as kids drifted from porch to porch, fridge to fridge, without anyone keeping score of whose house they were actually supposed to be in. Parents didn't track you by phone because there were no phones to track you with. They just knew you were somewhere on the block, and that was enough. Today, that kind of wandering would probably need a group chat and a pickup schedule. Back then, the whole street was simply considered safe ground, and every house was a little bit yours. Sometimes that meant eating dinner somewhere that wasn't your own kitchen, and nobody made a fuss about calling ahead first. The notebook at the corner store. Even the corner store ran on that same kind of trust. The man behind the counter knew your father's name before he knew yours. You could walk in, pick up a loaf of bread or a pack of cigarettes for your dad, and he'd just write it down in a little notebook under your family's name. No cash, no questions, just tell your pops I said hi. Whole families carried a running tab that got settled at the end of the month, sometimes with nothing more than a handshake. Today, a stranger letting a kid walk out with unpaid groceries sounds like a liability nightmare. Back then, it was just Tuesday. The store owner wasn't taking a risk, He was part of the neighborhood, same as everybody else. Even kids who weren't sent on an errand would wander in just to look at the candy rack and say hello. But it wasn't just about doors and tools. It was about who got to raise you. Any neighbor could discipline you. If you misbehaved 2 houses down, you didn't get away with it just because your own mother wasn't watching. Any adult on that street had the standing authority to call you out by your full name, march you home by the collar, and tell your parents exactly what you'd done, and your parents would thank them for it. Nobody called that overstepping. It was just how the street operated. Every adult was, in some small way, on duty. Today, a neighbor scolding someone else's child would likely get a frosty look, maybe a complaint. Back then, it was the opposite of overreach. It was proof that you belonged to more than just one household, that an entire street had quietly agreed to look out for you, whether you wanted them to or not. It wasn't really punishment so much as proof that somebody besides your own parents was paying attention. The babysitter was already family. When your parents went out for the evening, the babysitter usually wasn't a stranger from an app or an agency. She was the teenage girl from 3 doors down, the one whose little brother you played kickball with. She had the run of the fridge, the television, sometimes even the good plates if there was a special occasion. Nobody ran a background check because nobody needed to. Everybody already knew everybody's whole life story. Today, hiring someone to watch your kids usually comes with references and interviews. Back then, it just came with a phone number written on a piece of paper by the toaster and complete faith that the family 2 doors down would treat your children like their own. She already knew which cupboard had the good snacks and which shows you weren't allowed to watch past 8. Treats from neighbors, no questions asked. Walking home from school, you could count on at least one porch where someone would hand you a popsicle, a cookie, or a few coins for the ice cream truck. No questions asked, no parent present to approve it. You didn't think twice about taking it, and neither did they about giving it. It was just part of growing up on that street, a kind of quiet generosity that didn't need permission slips. Today, the idea of a child accepting food or money from an adult who isn't a parent sounds like a warning sign in a safety pamphlet. Back then, it was simply Mrs. Coulson being nice, the same as she'd always been. Sometimes it was a whole bag of penny candy, just because she'd made a special trip to the store that morning. Burning leaves and backyard smoke. In the fall, the whole street smelled like burning leaves. Every father raked his own pile into the gutter or a metal barrel and set it on fire without a second thought, while kids ran through the smoke holding their noses and laughing. Saturday afternoons brought the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid drifting from every other backyard. No permits, no inspections, just a grill, some hot dogs, and whoever happened to wander over from next door. Today, that smoke would probably bring a phone call to the city. Back then, it was simply the smell of the season, proof that everyone was home and everyone was doing the same small, ordinary thing at the same time. The smell stuck to your jacket for the rest of the day, and somehow that felt like part of the fun. Dogs that belonged to the whole street. And then there were the dogs. Nearly every house had one, and almost none of them were on a leash. They wandered from yard to yard all day, napped on whichever porch had the best shade, and showed up for dinner at whichever house was cooking something good that night. Nobody called animal control. Nobody filed a complaint. The dogs just belonged to the street the same way the kids did. Today, a loose dog wandering 5 houses down would probably end up in someone's backyard photo with a caption asking who it belongs to. Back then, everybody already knew it was just Duke from the blue house on the corner. Some dogs technically belonged to 3 or 4 different houses depending on who you asked, and everyone was perfectly fine with that. And then there was the simplest rule of all, the one that had nothing to do with property lines. Out until the streetlights came on. You stayed out until the streetlights came on. That was the only clock anyone needed. Nobody had a phone to check in with, and nobody expected one. You could be gone for hours, biking 3 neighborhoods over, building a fort in the woods, or just sitting on a curb talking about nothing. And as long as you made it home when those lights buzzed on, nobody panicked. Today, a child out of sight for that long would likely have a search party forming within the hour. Back then, the streetlight did the worrying for everybody. It wasn't neglect. It was just an entire neighborhood agreeing on the same quiet signal. There was no negotiating it, no exceptions for a good excuse. The streetlights came on, and that was simply that, the same rule for every kid on the block. Yards with no fences between them. A lot of those yards didn't even have fences separating them. Your backyard simply rolled into the Petersons, which rolled into the Garcias, like one long shared lawn that happened to have a few different houses sitting on it. Kids cut through 3 or 4 properties just to get to the best tree for climbing, and nobody thought of it as trespassing because there wasn't really a line to cross. Today, most of us couldn't tell you our neighbor's last name, let alone walk through their yard without asking. Back then, the absence of a fence wasn't an oversight. It was a quiet kind of statement that there wasn't much here worth keeping separate. You could stand in your own backyard and see clear across to where 3 other families were doing their own version of the exact same Saturday. The block party nobody planned. Some Saturdays, somebody would just decide it was time. Folding tables came out of garages, extension cords ran across the street for the radio, and by evening half the block was eating off paper plates in someone's driveway. Nobody sent invitations. Nobody needed a permit to close off a street that barely had any traffic anyway. Kids ran wild between the legs of adults, holding cans of beer, and the night usually ended with somebody's dad attempting to grill something he had no business grilling. Today, that kind of gathering would likely need a city form and a noise ordinance check. Back then, it just needed a nice evening and enough folding chairs to go around. Somebody always brought a radio, somebody always brought too much potato salad, and nobody ever seemed to mind either way. Porches. That were never empty. And after the dishes were done, the adults moved out to the porches. That was where the real news in the neighborhood got passed around: who got a new car, whose kid was struggling in school, who needed a casserole dropped off. People walking by would slow down, lean on the railing for a few minutes, and keep moving, never needing an invitation. Today, most porches sit empty, decoration more than destination. Back then, a porch without someone sitting on it after dinner looked almost wrong, like a chair pulled out from a table mid-meal. Even on the quiet nights, somebody was out there, just rocking slowly, watching the street do absolutely nothing in particular. The whole street, one long summer evening. And on the best nights of summer, it wasn't just one porch, it was the whole street. Tables dragged out into driveways, sprinklers running for the kids while the food cooked, and the sound of 6 or 7 different families' laughter blending into one long evening that didn't really end until it got dark. Nobody planned it weeks in advance. Somebody started cooking, somebody else smelled it, and within an hour half the block was outside. Looking back, it's hard to explain how something that ordinary could feel so good. It wasn't a party. It wasn't an event. It was just a regular Tuesday in a place where everybody still believed they belonged to each other. Years later, you'd find yourself trying to describe it to someone who never had it, and the words never quite landed the same way. So what actually changed? Was it the neighborhoods, or was it us? It would be easy to say the world simply got more dangerous, that locks and fences and background checks showed up because the threats got bigger. But that's not really the whole truth. Crime statistics, street by street, don't really explain why an entire generation stopped knowing their neighbors' last names. What actually happened is quieter than that, and maybe a little sadder. We got busier. We got more private. Garages replaced front porches as the way into the house, so we stopped running into each other on the way home. Air conditioning meant we didn't need to sit outside in the evening just to cool off, so the porches emptied out. Televisions, and then computers, and then phones gave us a reason to stay inside instead of wandering over to see who was around. None of that happened on purpose. Nobody voted to stop trusting their neighbors. It just slowly stopped being necessary, one convenience at a time, until one day the kid next door was a stranger instead of someone you'd grown up borrowing sugar from. It wasn't that the world was safer back then. It probably wasn't, not in every way. It was that we trusted each other more, sometimes more than we probably should have, and we got away with it more often than we had any right to. That trust came with a name attached to every house on the street. It came with porches that were never empty, doors that didn't need locking, and a kind of quiet agreement that everyone's children belonged, just a little, to everyone. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood once that trust is gone, even if everything else looks the same. The houses are still there. The lawns still get mowed. But something underneath it has gone still. The way a house feels different once you know nobody's coming by unannounced anymore. You can live next to someone for years now and know almost nothing about them, not their last name, not their kids' names, not whether they'd notice if your light stayed off for a week. That isn't a judgment on anyone. It's just where all those small, gradual choices eventually led. We didn't call it community back then. We just called it the neighborhood. It didn't feel like something special while we were living inside it. It just felt normal. Maybe that's why these memories stay so vivid all these years later, not because the things themselves were extraordinary, but because the feeling underneath them was. The unlocked door, the borrowed cup of sugar, the porch light left on for whoever wandered by. Small things, every one of them. But put them all together, and they added up to something we didn't have a word for back then, and maybe still don't, the simple, ordinary luck of being known. And if you're watching this and nodding along right now, you already know exactly what that luck felt like, even if nobody ever gave it a name. If you grew up on a street like that, you probably didn't realize how rare it was until much later. Maybe not until you moved somewhere where nobody waved, or sat on a porch that nobody else ever sat on. It's easy to miss something gradually, the same way you miss a person, not all at once, but a little more each year. So here's what we'd love to know. Which neighbor from those years do you still think about? The one who gave you a popsicle, or wrote your family's name in that little notebook, or made sure you got home before dark even when your own mother wasn't watching? Tell us about them in the comments. Tell us their name if you remember it, because somewhere out there, somebody else watching this grew up 2 streets over from you, in a neighborhood that probably looked exactly the same.